welcome everyone. This is Shane and Ryan Snow here. About maybe 2 more minutes, get everyone in the door, and then we'll get underway.
All right.
Okay, welcome everyone. Happy Thursday to you all. This is Shane Green here with Ryan Snow from the U.S. Green Building Council. Today we are talking about our month 4 topic, which is discussing values and aspirations with our community partners. This is a 12-month journey that we're all on together. We've talked about going out and serving to build relationships. We've talked about selecting an organization and making the ask. We've discussed how to recruit and build a team around our volunteers to really get a multi-generational support and a complete set of skills. And now we're here on the 4th month where we're starting to really take action and starting to get into the details with our partner organizations. So today, what Ryan and I want to take you on a tour of is our KickSTART workshop, which is the tool we've been building over the last 1.5 years to really help facilitate this conversation and set your projects up for success. So we're going to walk through the 3 different components of that program. We're going to hear from one of our ambassadors who's done one of these workshops in the past to get her perspective, and then hopefully at the end, address any questions, ideas, or concerns as we prepare to take on this work this next month. I'll also note that this will be recorded and then reprocessed and then shared with you guys, so you have perpetual access to this webinar and can refer to as you're beginning your journey around KickSTART. I also recommend, especially as we get into more of the meat and the slide-by-slide discussion that Ryan will take you guys through, get your pens ready and take notes accordingly. It's going to be some really good stuff and hopefully spark some ideas for you all. Okay, so KickSTART, what is it? It is the introductory activity within the advanced framework that helps organizations set out on this path of sustainability leadership. It's the event to really kick things off and get things going, and it's really designed to help these community-based organizations get ready to build the plan to green the spaces and places they occupy. So it's not yet building the plan, it's getting them prepared to, it's getting the right folks at the table, and it's ultimately setting them up for that long-term success, as well as endearing you to that organization to move it forward. It takes about, I think we're maybe underestimating, it takes about over 2 hours to complete this activity. We've got a workbook that we'll take you through. We've got a deck. We've got email copy, everything that we can do to help you facilitate this. We're continuing to iterate and make it better and better as it grows. as you're organizing and getting prepared for it, we recommend a venue that can accommodate up to 10 folks in a small group to have these conversations. We really recommend you to choose a date that is accommodating for your audience and the volunteers that are involved. We do recommend as well, or an option is to have it on site with them, so you can really get in the space and understand it better. I think that'll add to your deeper understanding of things. I also recommend considering some snacks or drinks to help facilitate and encourage the volunteers that are involved. And definitely try to seek out places that have wireless access just in case you need to dig a little deeper into things. Come prepared with pens and paper, whiteboards, or large sheets of paper to get things out at an idea level. Definitely bring your computer, and if you are going to be delivering through the deck, have a projector and screen ready to go. And ultimately, to kind of boil down why we're going about this and kind of think about this at an education level, we've got kind of 4 major objectives that we're hoping to deliver over the course of this KickSTART experience. And so our ideal cases, or I guess our objectives, is to discuss and understand how your organization's values, how their values are aligned, in fact, with sustainability. So there'll be a big discussion around that. And then number 2, to walk through these existing challenges and opportunities. So start talking about their space and the challenges that they're facing, and getting those down on paper. That's an important part of this process. Then we'll transition into brainstorming the dreams and aspirations that organization has, and that'll hopefully spark some ideas around how sustainability can help them get there. And then we have an exercise around really understanding who's at the table at that organization, who makes those decisions, and how we need to really craft our pitch internally to get some of this work done. Before I get into the pre-launch process, Ryan, any other thoughts on these objectives?
Yeah, so this is Ryan Snow. I work here with Shane. So when we first started creating the advanced tools, we didn't have this step. We crunched it in and had it as a short little conversation in another activity called Plan Builder. And what we found is for people to create a plan, oftentimes they have to sell the concepts internally and build support and start to unpack things a little bit more. So really, that's why we created this very, very distinctly. It's a starting point for them to identify when, this first objective of how does sustainability and green building and health, resilience, whatever the topic is, how does that relate to who they are as an organization? That's about kind of bringing people on board within their organization and seeing the true value of how implementing sustainable actions in their buildings and within their programming and whatnot actually add value to who they are and bring value through lower operating costs. So there's a lot of work that has to happen afterwards in building the team. And so I just wanted to explain how we came about creating this, and that helps to understand a little bit more of how the objectives start from talking about what is the value of sustainability to that organization, what are their challenges to implementing it, what are their aspirations, and then how do they get to those aspirations using the people and the resources to build that team. So that's just a little behind the curtain of how we got to creating this.
Excellent. Thanks, Ryan. So the way this deck is organized and the way we're talking about this, there's kind of three different phases of how we approach this event. The first is pre-launch. So what is the ramp up to this actual activity that we host with the group? There's a day of, so what is the in-person experience? What does that entail? And then what's the post-launch? So what happens after the event to make sure that we can move that project on to the next activity and appropriately follow up? And so what we want to get into first is obviously the pre-launch period. Within that, we have some tools around to help you inbound that project. So we have a survey that you can provide to that organization to help capture that first round of data around some of their square footage requirements, and start to suss out what's important to them, and use that. So day of, you have a little more background and insights into that. So that's a a WUFU link that we can provide to you as you are making that ask and setting up that date. We also have examples of email copy that we've used in the past to help you articulate well what's going to go on, and at this point, and then that's kind of the major resources we have at this point. And what we want to do now is to introduce Jacqueline from Columbus, one of our ambassadors, who's actually been through this process, to give us some perspective and insights on how she framed this opportunity to her Youth Build partner. And so, Jacqueline, if you don't mind introducing yourself as well as sharing what it took to get this all together at that early pre-launch phase.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jacqueline. So I'm in the Columbus area, and I've been currently working with Terry Green from Youth Build on his Smart Start Home project. And really, our pre-launch kind of activities for the KickSTART started with just me and Terry getting lunch, and he was very excited about the advanced program and about just USGBC in general and how we could work together. So we kind of made a decision at that lunch that we wanted to capture the excitement and the momentum that we had. So we set a hard date right away to do this KickSTART event, which in the end, there's goods and bads to that. I'll get to that. But from there, we reached out to Doug Widener from USGBC National because I had never ran an event, so we wanted to use him as a facilitator. But he also had a lot of good perspective, along with Ryan and Shane, on who to attend, who to invite, and also the number of people to invite. Because one of the questions that we had was, well, do we want to have a lot of people with small groups or just a couple people? And we ended up having about 12 people come, and it was about half and half between people from USGBC and people from the community and Youth Build. And how we did that is really, I took the USGBC folks, so I approached our board early on and kind of just kept them informed on what we were talking about and dates that we had in mind and kind of gauged interest from there. But then we also had a member on our board who is involved with the criminal justice system, so we I kind of approached her separately because I thought she would be a very good perspective to add to the event because she would have USGBC's perspective and also the perspective from the criminal justice system. And then also we involved Jeff Deno, who's the ambassador from Cincinnati, so that we could start to build these programs outside of the Columbus area in Ohio. And then one of our emerging professionals we approached because not only did she have the venue space for us, but also to make sure that our emerging professionals were involved. And then Terry went and kind of approached people from the community, so he got people from Youth Build, 2 different directors from Franklin County and Columbus, and then also we wanted to make sure a current Youth Build student was involved because we both thought that would be a very important perspective to have as we are starting to build this programming. And then Terry also reached out to people that have kind of been his mentors as he's been going through the Youth Build program. So he reached out to people that are running a halfway house and then also a minister that is working kind of behind the walls in the criminal justice system. So really the way that we chose the people to be a part of this event were people that we just already had those connections with that we felt comfortable that we could talk to about during this event, which in the end led to a very just fluid conversation for this. And what I was saying at the beginning, we set that hard date. So it was a very quick process that the KickSTART event happened, which in the end, we didn't probably talk about green building and sustainability as much as we had intended to do. But the conversation had a lot of really great ideas, and we learned a lot about the program that were really kind of essential to learn before we got into some of those more technical parts of what we're trying to build. So that's the good and the bad about having the event so quickly is we didn't necessarily talk about the green components, but by having it quickly we had that momentum and that passion, and we were able to have those conversations.
Beautiful. That's great, Jack. It's exactly, I think, what we want folks to hear. It might not always go exactly right, but it's just about giving it a try, and we're trying our best here to set you guys up for as much success as possible. So we definitely appreciate you just taking it on and making the most of it. And so at this phase, what we want to really emphasize and help you guys think about is what is your ask of your organizational representative. So as you're, especially in Jacqueline's case, what's her ask of Terry to make sure that he gets the right folks to the table and the right audiences are there from his perspective, and then also thinking through what are your volunteer needs? Do you want your advisor there? Do you want different types of experts based on the project type? So definitely keep those questions at heart as you're organizing your events. And I want to kind of turn over to Ryan to wrap up this component as well as lead us into what the day of experience looks like with KickSTART.
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me when Jacqueline was introducing this is, this didn't start with some high-powered event or anything. It started with a cup of coffee. Right, and so if we even look back just a couple of slides when Shane was saying, there's these pre-workshop, pre-event tools that we have. I also want to point out the fact that a cup of coffee, a conversation, pointing people to a good article around, the benefits of sustainability or green building, any of these things that we can bring to the table that already exist out there, and many of us are using them, it really starts with a conversation at the beginning and developing that relationship. So I know that we're always looking for materials and resources and whatnot to do it, but Jacqueline, you hit it right on the head that the best material oftentimes is a cup of coffee. Some folks, it might be a glass of whiskey at the end of the day or a cup of coffee in the beginning of the day, knowing who your audience is. But this is about relationships. And so not just like reaching out and saying, okay, we're going to do this event and let's go there. Okay, let's find out more about who you are and how can we make this happen. And then you build trust. And then it unfolds just like Jacqueline has presented. So now that you've established this relationship with an organization and with the people there, the thing that we want to drive towards is action. And so those first actions are the actual process of planning for and implementing sustainable strategies for their organization. And so KickSTART is just another tool or another resource that we have that brings people together on a specific day in a specific location to have conversations as a group and document those conversations that then are used to help chart a path forward. Really, you can think of KickSTART and Plan Builder as similar to being a design charrette. You're identifying what are the goals, what are the aspirations, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, who needs to be on the team, what resources do we have need to have allocated. And so that's really all that we're doing here. We're breaking it apart and creating a simple framework for folks to do that. So we have the KickSTART as the first part of that, which is really opening the conversation and opening the door. And then there's work that needs to happen that then leads into the Plan Builder, which is more of creating that broader sustainability plan. So the resources that we have on the day of are the actual KickSTART materials and the slides that go along with that. And then there's also a workbook. And the idea of the workbook is that you can capture that information. You may want to use a whiteboard or whatever as you're sketching out ideas and taking notes or whatever, but then documenting it immediately after that in the workbook so that folks have they have something physical that they can take back. The ideas and the great ideas and whatnot are captured and they're not lost on that day. So it's really, really important to make sure you have somebody there, not only to facilitate the dialogue, but to capture the information so that it's clear as far as what was discussed. We have a record of that, and then it helps with planning those next steps with your partner. So we're going to walk you through the different sections of KickSTART itself. and what happens there. The best way I find to start this out is with the KickSTART is to once again introduce who we are as an organization and what we're doing at the table, introduce yourself as an individual, and then also start to introduce the other people in the room. I think it's really important to frame this with, hey, this is part of, we're the U.S. Green Building Council. I'm a representative. I'm a volunteer of USGBC. I'm also involved with XYZ. Tell a little bit about who you are and the organization that you're working with to bring these services, and start out this type of a conversation very much with our own values. As members of the green building movement, we have a vision and we have an aspiration for everyone to be within a green building and a green community within a generation. That's why we're here today, because we want you to have the same benefits that we see in buildings across the globe. So some people might know about LEED, which is our main product or tool for advancing green building, and every single day we certify 2 million square feet in 150 countries around the world. We have hundreds of thousands of LEED accredited professionals who are doing this, and LEED is great and there's great results. But we know that LEED is a leadership standard, and it's maybe not the appropriate thing for everybody that's out there. So we're going to use LEED as a guide, or we're going to use LEED as a framework. We also have other tools at the table, such as the well rating system and sites, if we want to talk about our landscapes outside. All of these different things that we can bring to the table and the resources that are with them. So we're going to continue to use this as our organizing principle, but really what we're doing now with Advance, and this is the first activity in Advance, is to start a dialogue and help you as an organization take one step by step through this process so that you can come up with solutions that are going to benefit your organization the most and meet you where you are and clarify your goals and your aspirations and find the right solutions. So that's what Advance is. So quickly introducing who we are as a broader global community of green building professionals, some of the tools and resources and successes that we've had at the table, and what we're doing today. So starting it out from that perspective, and then going around the room and making sure that you have everybody do a quick introduction of themselves. So, Jacqueline gave a great example of all of the different players who were there. Some of them know each other, some of them don't. You want to level the playing field and make sure that everybody feels like they're part of the conversation and the team. So right out of the bat, before you even get into what are the objectives, what are we going to do, have everybody introduce themselves. Write it down on the flip chart. Write who's there, and it's great if you can have stickers or table tents or whatever that tell who people are and their affiliation. Recently, we did one of these in South LA, and we had all different types of folks at the table. We had green building professionals, we had utilities, and then we had a lot of representatives on staff and then from the board of the organization that we're working at. So we want to develop the relationships between those folks. Then we can introduce, okay, this is what we're going to do today. These are the objectives that we set out, and the objectives, this is a side note for you guys, the objectives that are on this slide are basically what the KickSTART module is tending to do. Now, every single time I go to work with an organization and do KickSTART, I review these with them before we even start, and we plan it and make sure that it makes sense to them. Now, oftentimes what I'll do is when I'm doing it on that day is I go in and I edit this. So in this case, you see the background picture. I put a background picture in there from the organization's website that we're working with. It's called Scope. It's in South LA. So we put that in there. You can change the pictures in the background to make it more relevant to the audience that you're doing, and you can even start to tweak some of the words that are on here. So for instance, I changed the objectives this is the general template, but I would change the objectives to say, discuss and understand how Scope's values and sustainability are aligned. Make it very customized to them so that they feel like they're part of it. Those little tweaks go a long way. When they start to see people and start to see words and things that are relevant to them, that makes folks really happy. You always want to go in with a real detailed agenda. Some of the earlier versions of this, we just had kind of a loose framework, I always go in and I actually have a printed agenda that even goes into more detail on some of these things and starts to assign who's going to do what when, or what types of conversations we have, or gives me some guidance on what's going to have there. Once again, you can customize this however you want, and obviously not every KickSTART is going to start at 2 p.m.
And an important note here that I think we're starting to use is distinguishing between a presentation and an activity. So folks know how, what to expect when we move to different phases, whether it's sitting back and taking notes or really getting into the content.
Great point. Yeah, this is definitely, unlike what we're doing right now, which is presenting, we want this to be very much a dialogue, right? So you introduce yourself, and then immediately have them engaged. Once you get them engaged early on, then it sets that expectation that there's going to be an activity there. So then you move into, okay, now we're going to start the actual workshop. We have this workbook. I want to make sure that everybody has this. Who's my scribe? This person's going to be taking notes up on the whiteboard, and then we're going to compile these into the workbook at the end. We also have tools for the facilitators themselves to understand a little bit more. You can see on Shane's screen right now that in many cases we have notes that are in here so that we're consistent in our messaging and whatnot, and that'll help you guys as facilitators, or if you bring in another facilitator to do it. But we start out, you can see on the agenda, is a quick presentation, 15 minutes or less, and that's including some time to discuss of the benefits of green building. We don't want to say green building is this, and these are all the things you have to do. That scares people away. This is about values, and we need to demonstrate why this is of value to that organization. So I always started out by saying, why are buildings important? We spent 90% of our time inside of buildings. Buildings have a major impact on our lives. We know that they impact our health. Did you know that indoor air quality is 4 to 5 times worse than outdoor air quality? We talk about the environmental pollution and all these things, but we don't think about what's happening inside of our buildings. We also oftentimes don't make the connection between resource use and all these things and the impacts that our buildings have on this. We might be concerned, you might be working with an organization that cares about climate change, let's say, or they might care about stewardship of resources. Well, you can say right here, these seem like big global issues, but when you start to work in your building, you have the power to make a change. You have the power to make a difference. These are all the impacts that we have. So you start out with the human perspective, talking about health, then introduce these are the environmental perspectives, and at the end of the day, we know that it costs money to run our buildings, and green buildings cost less to run. We don't want you to flush money down the drain. So you started out hitting each one of those areas very clearly to set the baseline for folks, and then you say, now we're going to introduce concept of sustainability. Sustainability has 3 different sides. We want to look at the people and the community and social equity. We also want to look at the environment or the ecology or the resources of our planet. And then we want to make sure that we're building strong economies and that we're being responsible with people's money. So just recap what you're saying there and then say, now we want to explain a little bit about what green building is. So here, and this is right off of USGBC's website, it's embedded in here. We have a great little video that you don't even need to do anything. You can explain a little bit about that. It's really great to have different modes of engaging folks throughout this so that you keep them in the loop. So this is just a funny little video. Say, now let's talk a little bit more about green building. I mentioned LEED before. LEED is a great organizing principle for this. Introduce the concepts of LEED. Say it's not just, maybe ask people, what do you know about green building? What do you think it is? And then go back to this image and say, LEED breaks it out into these areas. We're going to think about it in each of these areas as we progress together. So transportation, blah, 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 blah. We go through each of the areas. And then moving on to say, what we've noticed from all of our work over 20-some years in the green building industry is that we can have real impacts. Green buildings and the work that we do is the strategies that we employ impact all of these areas and say, we aim to impact in all these places, blah, 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 and we know there's results, so show them the data, simplify that message, say, at the end of the day, it's about reducing costs, and when you save money, you're able to implement and meet your mission as an organization. These are all not-for-profits that we're working at. I always then turn in and say, at the end of the day, I know you're going to think that this costs more, but there's ways that you could do it and it's effective. And there's been countless studies and just have that conversation from the get-go about the finances of green building. I then oftentimes do a quick assessment of stepping out and saying, well, this is part of a bigger picture of what we want to see in our community. We know that green buildings contribute to the economy, they create jobs, and they can make our places and our spaces that we occupy better, healthier, more vibrant. So this isn't just about what we do in our building and a bunch of green building strategies. We encourage everybody today to think about what is the larger impact that we can have as an organization to make our communities more sustainable, more resilient, more vibrant and healthy. So that's, really quick setup of how I walk through and present sustainability and green building and what we're going to do for everybody from the get-go. I'm going to just take a quick pause. I don't know if folks, if there's anything coming through the chat or if you guys have any questions before I move into the next slide. You can always raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep on.
Or folks have other arguments or perspectives that they've found successful in presenting these early concepts of green building that could embellish what Ryan mentioned.
Okay. Well, then we'll move on. So the idea here is to set the stage of who we are, what our values are as a green building community, what we're talking about and how it has a broader global impact, and then we move into this activity on aligning values. You'll see here there's a lot of explanation of exactly what you do in each one of these activities. So this first part is about 15 minutes, and how I think it's best to kick it off is find one of the leaders, probably your primary contact. In Jacqueline's case, this would be Terry. So Terry presents, this is the vision, this is who we are, this is what we want to get done. When I was working with Scope, who's the example here, we had the executive director stand up and say, introduce Scope. This is who we are, this is our mission, these are our programs, this is the community that we serve, these are the values that we have as an organization. Then you go through and you essentially have a dialogue. Well, how do your values and these values and benefits of sustainability and green building, where are they aligned? What is of interest to you? What are what are the things that stick out the most? What do you care about? And start to just unpack that conversation from an extremely broad perspective and capture that and write it down. This is really the foundation for coming up with a comprehensive, integrative solution for their projects, of what they want to do. So we have some tools here within the workbook. You want to capture what is the mission of the organization, talk a little bit more about what happens in their space. Who's there? When do they use it? These are pretty basic questions that I think you would start any kind of consulting about space with. But you want to understand and dig a little bit deeper into who the folks are, and then have the conversation of, well, how can that space serve you better? Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it is. So some of the sample facilitation questions that I've used are, just asking, obviously, who the ones that I just had, but how does your building reflect your mission as an organization and your values as a community? What are the most important ways you hope that your building can better serve you and the community that you serve? And how does your building impact people, the community, the environment, finances? Start to think from that holistic perspective. And so this is a dialogue that happens for about 15 minutes. You capture it, and then you move on. So that just sets the big picture and gets people engaged. I'm not seeing any questions come through, so I'm just going to keep on going. But when you move into the next activity in facilitating this is about 30 minutes, depending on how long you have. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this activity. We said earlier on it's best if you can actually be in that space. In that case, you would actually walk through the building. You've already talked about what happens there. You have an idea of who the organization is. Now go see the building. And then by walking through, everybody gets a pretty good understanding of that space. You can take notes on it of things that you see that probably wouldn't come up in just a regular old conversation. You get to look into the boiler room, look into the bathrooms, ask questions of what's happening when you see things there. For instance, when I was going through one of these one time at a KickSTART workshop, I looked up and I was like, they had great skylights. And so you point out, these are great skylights. What do you think? Blah, 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 blah. I said, do you know, are they leaking? Because I noticed some moisture in this area. Have you noticed any problems with indoor air quality or mold or any of these issues? And start to unpack some of those questions. You always want to point out the good, and then also probably point out some of those challenges as well. And so that is one way that you can start to do that. And by physically walking through the space. We're going to also introduce to you guys the START surveys, which are a quick basic assessment of the indoor and the outdoor of their space. And so knowing the questions that are on there and starting to look for some of those things and using that START survey as a way to explore and ask the questions is extremely helpful in this case. I do not recommend going through and doing the survey during this section. It's cumbersome, and I think you lose a lot because it becomes too focused on doing the survey rather than seeing the space and having the dialogue of how people are using it. Now, I've mentioned that there's two ways that you can do this. The other way is if you're not physically able to be in that space. In Jacqueline's case, there wasn't an actual building. They were looking to start a project, right? Most of the cases that we're focusing on are existing buildings. We've done the KickSTART in a whole bunch of different ways. We've worked with Green for All, and we did it with 150 people in the room from a whole bunch of different organizations. Obviously, we couldn't go to their spaces. So that's where having more volunteers to facilitate individual conversations with a small group or a bunch of small groups is really helpful. They can talk about their space. You can ask certain questions and learn more about that. Do you guys do recycling? What's going on with your energy use? Do you know when was the last time the building was renovated? Blah, blah. You can ask some basic questions to learn more about the existing conditions. And when you're talking about the existing conditions, it's not just, oh, yeah, we've got a really old boiler, but they say, we have a really old boiler, and we're really trying to find a way to maximize its efficiency and possibly even do a campaign for putting in a new one. So you start to unpack not only the existing conditions, but it alludes to what those opportunities are. So once again, the workbook has a place to collect some of this, and there's different ways that we've done this we like to modify things and try them out a lot of different ways. So have a general conversation about the building, but then possibly breaking it out into talking about energy issues, water issues, waste and materials issues, health issues, transportation issues, all of these different things. We really look to the lead dynamic plaque, frankly, as a kind of simple way to have conversations about performance. But we don't want you just to talk about the building features and the sustainability features. It should be focused very much on the operations and the use of that space. And oftentimes that gets into conversations about, well, this is really great, but our custodial contractor that comes in and cleans the building, they're the ones who really, choose the cleaning products, and so we can't do. Well, no, there's actually an opportunity there to bring them to the table or to educate them, or in some cases to find a new contractor. So we want to document all these, and some folks find it helpful to use categories like the LEED rating system or dynamic plaque categories or whatever it is to kind of lead that conversation so you're thinking holistically. So once again, knowing what's in the START survey, we've used this a lot, knowing what's in there to capture a lot of that information is really helpful. And then ultimately, we want to lead people to doing that as well as benchmarking their energy and water use. So that's the assessment of the building. We move into the brainstorming aspirations. This is like, okay, we've already talked about who you are as an organization and what your values are. Now we've brought it down to earth a little bit. We've talked about what happens in your space and so the existing conditions. Now what do you want to see happen? What is the change that you want to see? So that's what we do in this brainstorming activity. You know, I would say maybe 15 minutes or so to do this, more depending on how the time goes. But really this is where we start to move into a broader conversation about what are the goals, and this sets up the idea of creating a comprehensive plan for them. So some of the sample goals, and we have lots of notes in here on how to actually facilitate this, but some of the sample goals are, yeah, we want to reduce our operating costs, or we want to improve our indoor environment. We want to eliminate toxins from the building or reduce pollutants in the building. We want to foster healthy lifestyle choices, reduce carbon emissions, increase access for people through transit, create wildlife habitat, connect more with the community around the building, foster access to good quality food, preserve cultural assets and sense of space. These are all actual things that have come out of doing these Kickstarts. And so they give you an idea of the types of things. These are not goals that are, you know, SMART goals, measurable and achievable. These are overarching aspirations, things that they want to do. And you're not, in this case, you're not going to find the solutions necessarily, but you're starting to identify what is the change that they want to see. Once again, we have this wonderful workbook where you can put all that stuff in there. And then the last part of it is about the team. We know in the green building community that an integrative team approach where you have the team assembled early in the process is the most effective way to get things done. People feel buy-in. They're there from the beginning. You have this great brain trust, and so that team is extremely important. You've just led them through an activity of thinking big. What are the big goals that we want to have? Now we want to bring it back down again to a very tangible section of, okay, to start to move towards these goals, what people do we need to have at the table who aren't already here? So oftentimes it says, you know, let's find out more, you know, more from this organization, or, hey, I've got this friend over here who knows this. You start to identify some of those other folks. They may be major or minor members of that team, but they can bring something to the table to help foster the relationship and bring things into reality. So those are the people that you might want to invite to the plan builder, which is the next activity with this group. But teeing up the conversation about the buildings, I always do a quick little introduction to the importance of teams and the importance of having everybody at the table early for goal setting, making clear commitments to what they can do, and assessing what the strategy is and making sure that they can start to implement that strategy. That's what we're moving towards. So in this activity, they start to identify who are those people that they need to have at the table, which primes us for the next section, which is the plan builder, where those people would actually come together. So the idea of a team here is that you establish accountability, you get people on board, all the things I just said. Here are some examples of the goals that we want to create in the future around our space. So you can talk about what some of those are and get to the point of saying these are the clear goals, and then we're going to talk about the strategies in our plan builder, which is the next major activity. This is where we're going to. So the team is extremely important. Think about who those folks are. What attributes or expertise do they bring to the table? Sometimes it's passion. Sometimes it's decision-making authority or experience. Sometimes it's that they're really good at project management, or they can bring other people on board. They're influential. Sometimes they have, they just have a lot of brawn. They're going to commit to it, and they're going to make sure that it's done, and they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So sometimes those relate to specific positions, rather it's a staff position at the organization or a volunteer or a board member, or it could be another organization that you want to bring to the table that can help with this. So for instance, when we work with schools, oftentimes, we might have the head of facilities there, but what about a teacher? Teachers have a lot of influence, and they'll bring with them all of the students, and they're looking for activities and ways to integrate sustainability into their curriculums. So they're a great asset to bring to the table. So that's an example of what we're looking at here. So we use an activity called power mapping, and we really do an abbreviated version of this. The issue at the end of the day is to green the building. So in power mapping, what you do is you identify an issue, and you identify who are the movers and the shakers that you need to have to make that happen. So in this case, you just brainstorm. Who are those people or who are those organizations, and get specific. If you know exactly the person's name, get their name down, who they're with, how do you contact them, and why are they important? What is it that they bring to the table? Make that list so people understand who the players are that are currently there, as well as those that they need to bring to the table. Oops, this is just a random slide. So from there, they start to be able to build the actual team, and so really their next steps are to cultivate the relationships and bring those team members on, and bring other people to the table for the plan builder activity. So plan builder is really where you start to move into what is it that we're actually going to accomplish here, and then you identify not only the goals but the strategies or the activities that are going to get you there, and then you start to assign people to make those things happen, and that's when you move into the focus phase of advance. So clarifying who that team is and what they need to do is important. Then you move into next steps. Shane, I feel like I've been talking forever.
Yeah,
People are probably sick of me.
Here's some water, dude.
No, I'm good.
All right.
There's one thing I like in life. It's talking too much.
That's true. That's very true. So as the workshop is rounding up, as those conversations are getting recorded and written down, and those ideas expressed, at this point is your time to transition into explaining to your partners and the volunteers involved what's next, because ultimately this is just the start of your relationship. And so if your project has opted into the 12-month calendar, the next major step is to transition into fully baselining their existing conditions. So while we did talk about those, and we did do a tour today with our partner at the KickSTART, this is where we really sit down, or not sit down, but actually fully walk around the project and use the START survey tool to get an assessment of where they stand at a sustainability level in both the inside and the outside of their building. And so that next month is where you deploy this tool. We'll obviously have a training later in April to get you guys prepared for this, but this is where this tool is deployed, and this is where you articulate to your partner to help them understand what's next. From there, that then dovetails into the next month of activity where we're benchmarking the utilities, and that's where the Energy Star work comes in, where we'll work with that partner to then start entering their utility, their energy and water use and bills into the portfolio managers so they can start understanding what that use is. And then the next kind of major thing on the horizon would then be to move into Plan Builder, getting them their goals and outlines and strategies set up using the Plan Builder workshop and the tools associated with that. And so you're really charting and providing a very clear path on how, what's next, how they move forward, and how they take all the great things and ideas generated on this particular day and really move it into actual goals and strategies and action over time. That's the end of the workshop. Any other kind of general things, Ryan, on how you wrap up the day or things that you found to be effective before we get into follow-up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think letting everybody know there that this is just the beginning and that there's more to come, and reinforcing that this is an exploratory process, and it takes the team, but having them know that you're there and you're committed to seeing them through this process is extremely important. I can't stress enough how the relationship and trust is a big part of this. I will have to say, though, that actually your next part is probably the most important.
Okay.
I'm really good at the day of stuff, but I'm horrible at the follow-through afterwards. And so, I have to force myself actually to do this, and I'm being completely candid and transparent about that. But the next steps and continuing that relationship, if you just do it and then you walk away and they don't hear from you immediately afterwards, I think that they're expecting something. And so you as a project manager, essentially, for this, need to follow through on your commitment to that organization, and then also make sure that other people that said that they would do something are there to do it. So that's my advice.
So post-launch, again, is very critical to make sure that your partner is supported, that they feel like it was worth their time. And so this ultimately really falls on you, the ambassador's shoulder, to make sure that we are continuing to shepherd these projects forward. So we have a few different tools built to help you collect data on how the day went, as well as how to effectively follow up. We can provide email copy for follow-up. We've got a participant follow-up survey, so the projects have a follow-up that they can give feedback on how they enjoyed the experience, what they got out of it, how to get better, and that enters into like a larger data set that we can use to continuing to build these tools and make them better, as well as give feedback to you on how what you did well and where we can take to improve your performance. Additionally, we also have one for the volunteers that are involved to help understand and see how their experience was at a volunteer level. 2 different surveys that we can provide you guys links to. Also, for the volunteers involved, this experience is worth 3 hours of lead continuing education, or CMP hours with GBCI. So anyone that has a lead credential, this counts for your credit there. And we can provide you a link to uploading your roster for the day to make sure that people get credit for their performance. Back to the project side, what we really recommend is to word process your workbook. So take all of those notes that were either collected on the whiteboards or in your particular workbook, get them into a computer in a digital form, so people can have access to, everyone can have access to that. I'd share it with your volunteers, I'd share it with the projects, and then I would also, in that follow-up email, give some recommendations throughout. We're excited to work with you. We'll be following up shortly to start getting a START survey scheduled to really help you move into the next phase of advance.
And, frankly, if you're able to do it afterwards, of course, you don't want to keep everybody there the whole time, but if you're able to walk through the space right afterwards and do that with one of the people there, it's always easier to schedule one meeting than it is to do multiple meetings. So, consider that if there's a core group of people that want to stay after for an extra half hour or whatever, to sit down and talk through that and then check a few things out. That, I think, will be really helpful with you in your next steps. But we're going to explain a little bit more about that in a future session.
Sure. So, yeah, Jack and I'll follow up with you on how to register your attendees, or take your attendees and be able to give them continuing education hours. And so that is the KickSTART experience. The major themes are that this is just the start. We've had, Ryan has led a ton of these all over the country, really beta testing with different audiences, different formats, and this is our most refined state. We've had a handful of partners that have been able to leverage this resource on its own, but we're really coming into fever pitch on seeing this tool fully deployed through you guys this next month and beyond. And so we're really eager for your feedback as we continue building this tool and making it the best possible experience for you and our partners. And so I think as we wrap up here, just some like takeaway pro tips that we've had in the past. Let's see here. Some feedback that we've gotten is make sure you definitely have those 2 hours reserved with some padding on the front and back, because things might get delayed based on the comments. This is going to be a really robust conversation, and so definitely the time to hone those facilitation skills to keep people on pace and make sure that we can really hit all the topics that we need to happen, and make sure those ideas are captured all over every time.
And don't be afraid. Like I've made, we do this all the time with these courses, like sometimes we need 2.5 hours, and we know that from the get-go. So don't be afraid to schedule it for 2.5 hours, particularly since everybody's getting CE hours. 2.5 hours, I would just bank on that.
Cool.
And you could do it for 4 hours if you really wanted to, knock things out. But people start talking and they get excited, and you just need to be able to keep it on schedule, but also allow for that creativity and conversation.
Some other considerations, given this is just the first foray into it, and it's a kind of a basic conversation, don't overplan the amount of volunteers that need to be there. It's just the start. Plan Builder will require some more specific volunteers with specific sets of skills. And so Frank Sherman, who's done this with our friends out in Philadelphia, I just lost my train of thought. He realized that everyone didn't need to be there. So keep this core group smaller, make sure the right folks are there, and really make it a quality experience for folks. And then, again, another big tip from Frank out in Philly is to really be explicit about the next steps. So hopefully Ryan and I were able to hammer that home to you guys, to really be clear with your partner what's going on and where they move forward on.
Shane, to build on that about having volunteers there, in some cases it's actually better, rather than a traditional volunteer, to have other not-for-profit organizations or the utility company or other folks that are there that have programs that they want to get the word out. They oftentimes will show up, and they add a lot of value to the conversation. So we had this when we did the KickSTART with Green for All. We had several public utilities that were there, and they sat at tables and had conversations with folks. There was a not-for-profit that's dealing with stormwater issues and landscaping issues. There were different folks there that could help add to the conversation, but you didn't have to recruit them because they wanted access. So thinking about who are some of those allied partners locally, they, not just for this, but for a lot of these things, they can be of a lot of help.
Excellent. So to round things out, your ask this upcoming month is to host a KickSTART workshop for your partner organization. Obviously, we're working with each of you individually to really right fit when that happens and how it happens, but that's definitely your goal, and we are here to help support, get you there. So that's it for Ryan and I. We will stay on the line to answer questions or field any feedback from you guys, but thanks for tuning in. We are excited to really get things going now that our projects are falling into line and our teams are forming. So I'll cut it off here, but if folks want to continue talking, feel free to speak up. And thanks for joining us.